those are the moments where you jump in to your board of directors of female friends and be like, bring it to the board. What does everybody think?
This is Space for All. Welcome to Space for All. I'm your host, Valerie McKiernan. Today, we're speaking with Emily Calandrelli. Emily is well known in the space industry as the Space Gal. She has several TV shows out, including one that just recently launched on YouTube, as well as many books, with the latest being on the New York Times bestseller list. I know you're going to love this interview with Emily, so listen in. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited to have you here on Space for All. Can you just introduce yourself for the people listening?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Emily Calandrelli. Online, I'm known as the Space Gal, and I'm an MIT engineer turned science TV show host. I suppose if people listening have young kids, they might know me as the host of Emily's Wonder Lab.
Yes, definitely. So let's go on that journey. How did you start from how you grew up and then to MIT and beyond?
Yeah, I actually didn't have any scientists or engineers in my family. I didn't know anybody who was a scientist or an engineer, but my dad had grown up in poverty in West Virginia, and he had worked his way up to middle class where I grew up. And he just instilled in us the value and the importance of financial security. And so, to be quite honest, the only dream I had for myself growing up was a dream of financial security, a dream of having a job that paid good money. And so I never would have to worry about the things that my dad had to worry about. And so when I went to choose my major, it wasn't because I dreamed of going to space. I dreamed of working at NASA. It was because I knew that engineers made good money. And I was like, this is going to be hard and I'm probably going to hate it, but I'm going to make my family proud and provide for my family. And I got there and I became enamored with it. I fell in love with it. It was like this reluctant love story of like, will they, won't they? And then eventually I flew on the vomit comet as a student. And I was like, they will. I love this. I'm staying in it. I'm obsessed. And I guess the rest is history. And so I did well in my undergrad at West Virginia University and then went on to MIT. And then from MIT, I became a TV show host. And my career sort of took a very cool pivot from there.
So how did the opportunity come to you for the TV show at MIT?
Right. So I'm graduating and I'm looking for a job, and I get a call from a production company that asked if I would like to be the host of a space TV show. And they found me because when I was in my undergrad at West Virginia University, I was one of the only women. I was winning these national scholarships. I had a 4.0, and they treated me sort of like this poster child for the engineering program of like, look, this girl goes to our school. Isn't that cool? And so I was in a lot of their articles and commercials and pamphlets. And if you searched Space Girl at the time, I would come up in one of the first pages on Google. And so they found me from all of the publicity that my undergrad had done. And asked if I wanted to be the host. And I was like, I've never done TV before. I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'll give it a try because it sounds like fun. And we've been doing it ever since. We're filming our next season. It's been on for over a decade now. Xploration Outer Space is the show's name. It's Saturday mornings on Fox. But yeah, that show changed my life.
Wow. Okay. So your first show was that show. And then you moved, you added more shows to that. How did that happen?
Yeah. So as I started doing that, I learned that I was the first woman in the United States with their own nationwide science show. First woman with a national science show. And because of that, I had no idea that was the case at the time, but because of that, I would get these messages from families, especially ones with little girls who were like, we've never seen an engineer on TV like this before. She's never seen a scientist on TV like this before, a woman, female scientist like this before. And it just had this impact that I had never really experienced myself. And so I wanted to do more of that. So I started pitching my own shows, and I was pitching these big science shows to big science networks and was getting a lot of the same feedback regardless of the network. And it was that the vast majority of the people who watch our TV shows on this network are boys and men. And we just don't know if they would relate well to a solo female host. They didn't have an issue with the show or the content. They had a concern about me being the host, even though I have 4 degrees in science and engineering, even though I have the credibility, even though I was an Emmy-nominated host. And I was checking off all the boxes one should check to be able to pitch these shows. Wow. And then in one particular meeting, I was asked, do you have a boyfriend or something who could co-host the show with you? Not like, do I have an Emmy-nominated boyfriend who's also an engineer, a scientist specializing in space. It was just like, do you have a generic male figure that you could just put right next to you to make it easier for our audience?
And this is within 10 years, right? Like this is not 20 years ago. This is
exactly
relatively recent.
Yeah, this is in the last 5 years. And to this day, that is the feedback, because they see it as a financial risk. Because they're putting money into it, and they just don't think that it's worth the risk. I don't know why. It doesn't make total sense to me that men wouldn't want to see women talking about science on TV, but I guess I'm not in their position. And so I started also pitching children's science shows. Okay. Because while Hollywood felt uncomfortable with a woman teaching science to adults, they felt quite comfortable with a woman teaching science to children. And so I had more success in that arena. We had a pilot that was picked up at Nick Jr., but that didn't end up going to be greenlit. But then Netflix came around and they were interested in this show that we were pitching. And we tweaked it a little bit for Netflix. They ended up greenlighting it, and that was Emily's Wonder Lab. And I filmed that show 9 months pregnant about 5 years ago now. So it's been out there for a while.
Wow. So by the time you got the show greenlit, you were pregnant. Mm-hmm. That must have been very hard to do. It was
quite hard. Probably one of the harder things I've done in my life.
Yes.
Is film that my dream job at 36 weeks pregnant.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine that. So you did, no, I mean, the idea of being on camera, but also having to host your own show that pregnant.
Yeah.
That's very intense.
You have to, especially for a kid show, you really need to have a lot of energy. Yes. And it'd be very smiley. And there would be days where we'd be filming out in the LA sun in July. And I was like, I just need to make it a few more days. Baby, stay inside. Just a few more days.
And that was season 1, right?
Yeah.
That was filming season 1.
The one and only season of Emily's Wonder Lab.
What was the reason that was given that it was canceled? Was it viewership at the time?
It is hard to say, because Netflix is notoriously very secretive with their numbers. Okay. And so it's hard to know whether or not it didn't do as well as it needed to. The one data point I do have is that 4 years later, Emily's Wonder Lab, now 4 years old, mm-hmm. is still performing in the top 16% of all shows, all movies, everything across all of Netflix worldwide. Wow. And so did it not perform well enough? Who knows? Only they know. And so, but I think that there are a lot of unanswered questions there, because I too wonder why.
Yeah, I know my family was very disappointed when there wasn't a next season, but I think we've rewatched the first season so many times. But you brought it to YouTube, right? So that's the next step. How is that transition kind of taking on?
So the journey was, I was the science person on Emily's Wonder Lab. I came up with all the science experiments. And so I had ideas for 70 more episodes of Emily's Wonder Lab. And I brought them all the science that I had, designed for the show, and they passed. And so I ended up turning those science experiments into book series, 2 books of 50 science experiments each, and that became a #1 New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
And so that told me that there was this interest in this type of work in my science. And so from those books, I turned each of those science experiments into a video that I'm going to be putting on YouTube soon called Emily's Science Lab. And I'm just like, I'm so excited about that because I've wanted to get in front of the camera doing science again. And to be able to do it at the level that we did it for Netflix was a challenge because it takes a production quality that an individual can't normally afford. It's like, it's a pretty high number to get that type of level. But what I did was I used every single penny I made from the books, and I invested it into this series and paid for a production company to film it, not quite at the level of Emily's Wonder Lab and not quite with the same number of people involved, but at a level I was really happy with. And we made 100 videos. We're editing them all now. I have a handful that are ready to go already. And I think in the next few weeks, we'll be launching them on YouTube.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
You must be over the moon about that. Are they going to be released on like a cadence or all at once? How's that going to
I still have to figure it out, but I do think it'll be in a batch of like maybe 5 at first, all at once. So you have like a solid 5 to look at and then 1 a week after that.
That's amazing. Congratulations. I mean, and then to go from, you have the TV shows, then you have the 2 books and the New York Times bestseller. What did that feel like when you actually got that news that it was on the bestseller list?
It's like one thing to get something on the first try, like that. Getting something on the first try is always really exciting. But with the #1 New York Times bestseller, I had been trying to get on the New York Times bestseller list for 7 years. And this was my 9th book, my 9th shot of trying to get it. And I finally got it on the 9th book. And I think the fact that like it took so many tries made me appreciate the accomplishment more so than if I got it on the first try. But yeah, it was a pretty special moment. And because I brought a lot of my friends and family along for the journey of like, okay, everybody check the list at this time on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. And everybody's refreshing. And then like they all noticed that I didn't get on it. And so we're like sad together. And now we get to celebrate together. So it's been fun to be able to bring everybody on the ride.
That's awesome. Okay, so you have the TV shows. Now you're going to go to space.
Yeah.
Did you have any idea like that was even in the cards?
Well, when I was an intern, I interned at something called the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, which is this organization that really just helps make sure that all the private companies in the space industry are speaking to each other, are on the same page when it comes to policies and regulations. And it's an advocate for these private space companies in DC. And so I worked there because I was really interested in policy and space. And when I was working there, this is when the suborbital spaceflight industry was really starting to come into play. We were starting to hear more about Virgin Galactic, especially. And I had done actually my MIT research on prize-based contests. And if anybody listening is familiar with how like Virgin Galactic came to be, their spacecraft designed by the aviation legend Burt Rutan was created for the Ansari X Prize, which was this prize to see which private company could travel to space on a mostly private funded vehicle twice within 2 weeks. And they ended up winning that prize with the Spaceship One vehicle. And so they turned that vehicle into Virgin Galactic. And they were like, well, what if we just kept doing this? Like, what if people paid to go to space on this vehicle? And so they worked on that vehicle for so long to perfect it and to make sure it was ready for paying customers. And when I was working at the commercial spaceflight industry, I was hearing more and more about this vehicle. And when I was an intern, I was like, I wonder if I'm going to fly on that vehicle one day. Like I had a dream that I was going to fly on a suborbital vehicle when I was a college intern. And so to have that dream come true now, 10 years after the fact, it feels like this dream that has been sort of in the back of my mind for quite a long time, on a different vehicle, of course, with Blue Origin. But it is something that it just feels like I'm fulfilling the dreams of my younger self.
That's amazing. Do you have any idea what type of training you're going to have to do?
Oh, yeah. God, it's very minimal.
Really?
Because this is the beauty of these new vehicles, is that with Blue Origin, it is a fully autonomous rocket. Nobody on board is flying it. They're not doing anything. We are all passenger princesses on this vehicle. And so all we do is you have like a week before you go, really a few days before you go, you go and I don't know the exact specifics of all the training you get across those 3 days, but it's mostly to prepare yourself for the G-forces that you'll experience it. And it's really not too much. I'll experience more G-forces on some of my fighter jet flights that I've had. And you just practice getting in and out of your harness so that you can float freely and then get back in safely when it's time to land. And so there are very important things that you must know before you get into that rocket. But it's stuff you can learn in 3 days.
It's 3 days.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of when that's going to happen?
I don't know exactly yet, and I also can't share exactly yet. So it's a mix of like, I might know the general timeline, but I'm not allowed to share just yet.
And how long are you actually going to be up there?
So the entire flight is 12 minutes long.
No way.
From launch to landing, 12 minutes long. And it's absolutely wild to me. And so this is the rocket I'm on is called New Shepard, and it's named that way because we take a very similar flight trajectory as Alan Shepard, the first American who flew into space. So it's a suborbital flight. You go up, you touch space, and then the capsule comes back down. It deploys 3 parachutes, and you land in the middle of West Texas. And it's a very quick experience, but you have about 4 or 5 minutes in space to float weightless and look out the window and get that like a magnificent view. And it's been, I'm so excited.
This is remarkable. And you only need 3 days of training-ish. It sounds like.
It's so funny because a lot of my followers, and I try to correct when I can, because I know that the space industry people especially have a lot of feelings about NASA astronauts versus commercial astronauts and like what's the new definition of an astronaut, which, you know, I understand, but what an exciting period of life to be in where we are discussing these details about like what is an astronaut really? And we have so many people flying to space in so many different ways that we are questioning the definition of an astronaut. And I think that in itself is super exciting. But it is funny because I'll have my followers be like, oh no, are you worried that you're going to get stuck in space like the Boeing astronauts? No, darling. My flight is 12 minutes long. I am not worried about that.
We're doing 2 very different things.
Very different things.
Okay. And I read that the flight is being sponsored, right? So it's like a partnership or no?
No,
okay.
It sounded like it was, but it's not. I do have one really like a very good sponsor with Marshall University.
Awesome.
Wing to Wing Foundation. It is a university based in West Virginia, and they love the idea of uplifting West Virginians and advocating for accessible education. And so they are sponsoring a portion of the flight so that I can speak a lot to their accessible education program called Marshall for All, Marshall Forever, which pays for the tuition of students that go to their college so that they can graduate debt-free. It's an incredible program, and we need more things like this in the country so that people can actually go to college and not have this crippling debt after they leave. And so they're my best and favorite sponsor for my space flight.
Amazing. I love that. And speaking of West Virginia, you're going to be the first person from West Virginia in space, right?
I thought I was. This is all a learning experience, isn't it? So when I announced that I was, and I had done my due diligence, and I had spoken to all the right people, like Blue had checked it out, and I had talked to all the journalists that I had spoken with about the announcement. Everybody did their own independent verification. And so we all thought that I was. But then when the announcement came out, there was a Blue Origin astronaut who had flown a few years ago who was like, "Welcome to the West Virginia Female Astronaut Club." And I was like, are you from West Virginia? And I was like, what a pleasant surprise that more people from West Virginia are going.
Absolutely. But also Blue Origin checked it out and they didn't know their own.
Well, to be fair, it's not something that she has mentioned or posted about or spoke about or written about or included in any of her stuff online. So it wasn't like a big connection for her. So I don't think that anybody the information was certainly not out there. To be fair.
Yes, but you are one of the first woman. Yes, you're the second. You're the second woman from West Virginia, and you're one of the first 100 women in space.
We'll see. It all depends on how the space flights come out. Yeah, because right now we're getting close to the number. We're getting close to 100.
What are we at? Do you know?
I actually asked Supercluster. If you're familiar with Supercluster, they keep the most accurate and up-to-date astronaut database. And I asked them recently to give a number because I think that we might be close to 97, 98, 99.
Wow.
But Wikipedia isn't up to date, and it's also inaccurate. Like, we know that there are some inaccuracies on their lists. And so I'm waiting on Supercluster, but I think that we're close. So I don't know if I will be. It depends on, as you know, launches change. So it just sort of depends on how the launches stack up.
And you said you're launching out of Texas?
Yes, out of their West Texas facility. It's called Launch Site 1.
Launch Site 1. That's wonderful. Okay, so being a female in this industry, right? There are not a ton of us, but it's growing very rapidly. I know I look around after being in this industry from a kid, and I see today, and while, I'm still one of the only females in a conference room, there might be one or two more, and then, it's been just growing since then. So it's wonderful. But one thing I have noticed is that it has bred competition over the years between other women. And you're about to go on an all-female flight, right? And you work with I don't necessarily know that mine is all-female. I don't think so. I wish. I would love to be one of many, but I don't know. I guess I can't technically say which flight I'm on, so you won't know. Who knows? So I guess we'll know when we get to Texas. I have so many questions for Blue Origin at the moment.
Yeah, it's hard. I will say that, like, also the astronauts don't get a lot of information either. And so when I say, like, I don't know what flight, it's sort of, you don't really know what flight you're on until you're in Texas. I don't really know who's on my flight. So everything is kept very top secret for everybody involved. Because also we would get in trouble if we told people more information about our flight. So it's probably best that we're kept in the dark just to save us. But yeah, so we'll see. I would love to be on an all-female flight. I would say that would be my absolute dream, to be on an all-female flight.
It would be very, very cool if they did that.
Yeah.
Which is what I thought they were doing. But if they're not doing that, then hopefully maybe they do it in the future. Okay. So in this industry, there's a lot of competition. Do you have any experience kind of either getting around that or working with other women and supporting each other over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think that when you are in a male-dominated field, and you see a lot of, like, the top people in the field, especially this is the same in science communication as well. The top science communicators on YouTube, the top channels on YouTube, all male. And when you see that, and if you're one of one of the 2 women in the top 10 or whatever it is, it feels almost like you're competing with them, which is such a illogical way to think of it. Because when you look at some of the men in the industry, they'll collaborate a lot. They'll have these partnerships with each other. They're working together and having fun. And it seems as if women, if only we were to work together, we would all be better off, because when you do that, a few different things happen. One is that you can share your knowledge and your skill sets, and you can learn from each other's mistakes. And so you can both be more efficient in your career trajectories in that way. But also, like, when it comes to social media, like, we can share communities and followers and bring together people from different worlds together. And so I see it as something that is absolutely more beneficial to be collaborative in that sense. And something that I've personally noticed throughout my career is that there's this generational divide, that some of the women of the older generation are much more competitive with other women that I've seen. And I've had some really disappointing interactions with some people in an older generation. Whereas in my generation and the generation below us, younger than us, I feel it to be way more collaborative and way more open and transparent. And this difference is really hopeful. I get like very excited that these changes are coming, because when you do meet a glass ceiling that is held down by another woman, you're like, this is counterintuitive and doesn't feel great. People who break the glass ceiling and then pull up the ladder and then reinstall the glass ceiling after they've left. I've certainly seen that happen. But in this next generation, I see much more of the, like, break the glass ceiling and then pave a way that's larger than the one that you took, to make sure that you aren't you might be the first, but you're not the last.
Yeah. And have you found any ways that are better than others to support women still climbing up that ladder?
Yeah. I think being transparent about a lot of things, particularly with money. With my group chats with women, I am so forthcoming with, like, what I've been paid, how much money I make, because those things are notoriously kept secret. And when you don't share that information, it puts people at a disadvantage, because they don't know what to ask for. They don't know what they deserve. They don't know what's normal in the industry. And when you have an industry where men are often paid more than women, you need to be more transparent with that so that they know what to fight for. So that in particular is one that I find to be really, really useful. And also just having those community spaces on WhatsApp or on Slack or Discord or wherever you find to be the most efficient way to communicate with people, having that community to go to, whether it be to vent or to be like, I just had this problem. I just had this weird interaction. I'm not sure how to deal with it. My heart is pumping so fast. I don't know how to react. Those are the moments where you jump in to your board of directors of female friends and be like, bring it to the board. What does everybody think? I need everybody's opinions. Give them to me. And that has happened. And that's been my saving grace on more than one occasion, especially as my career develops and the problems get harder and more complex and there's more to lose. That board becomes so much more valuable.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. Until recently, I didn't know I needed it until very recently, and I got it, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like a brand new career life. Like, this is amazing. It's great,
and it makes, like, the problems feel smaller and more manageable, and the successes feel more fun because you have people to share it with. But yeah, when it's the most isolating feeling when you experience something that feels like a problem or a challenge that just feels so insurmountable. And if you're dealing with that on your own, you can spiral. But when you bring it to the board, it feels like you can, like, bite away at it piece by piece.
Yeah. Like last year, I was like, maybe this isn't the industry for me. Maybe I need to go back to the TV industry where I was before, because I felt a sense of community there. And being post-COVID siloed in our homes and things like that, it's weird. But then this community came on board, and my goodness, has it made all the difference. And someone I recently interviewed said the same thing. It can be just one friend at work that you talk to, and that's where you find home. It's extremely important. So I think I'm excited that more women are becoming a part of this industry, because when I look around, it's nice to be able to have that board of directors to talk to whenever you need them. So when it comes to getting more women in the industry, getting more diversity in the industry, obviously you have the TV show, which is reaching out to kids at a very young age and teaching them about STEM, as well as the books and everything that you've done. Is there something that you recommend for parents to do or educators to do that really helps get STEM involved at a young age?
Yeah, the thing that I always recommend is find a science communicator online or a character in a book or whatever medium that your child gravitates to who looks like them or has some connection to them, because a kid who sees somebody who looks like them, if it's like a girl looking at a girl or a person of color looking at a person of color or whatever it is, like that makes whatever they're saying feel so much more relatable, because sometimes it's not about the content necessarily. It's about the person who is saying it that makes it long lasting for that individual, for that kid. And then meet them where they're at. Like if your kid loves YouTube, try to search on YouTube for these people. If your kid's a big reader, try to find books that have these characters in them, and then share that interest. Like ask about the person, ask about like what they learned and why you like them, and all of these things. Just take an interest in that, because for me, growing up with parents who didn't know much about science or engineering, all they did was take an interest, like a genuine interest in what I was learning and why I wanted to learn about it. And they just cared. And that was enough. That was the baseline of everything that I needed. I didn't need like a mom who went to college. I didn't need a dad who worked at NASA or anything like that. I just needed their love and support. And that was enough.
So you have a lot going on. Very exciting. What is next for you? What are you looking to do? Go into space. You have your TV show. Is there anything else you're working on?
The YouTube launch will be the next big thing. That's been something I've been gearing up for quite a while. So I'm still in the midst of editing videos and trying to make sure that those do well. My goal is to use those videos as data collection in terms of which science experiments families gravitate toward, and perhaps offer additional supplies for those particular science experiments. And so not only would they have something to read if they like science, they have something to watch that they like science, and they would have like a physical product that they could buy to do the science themselves. Because so many families, they want to do the science experiment, but they don't want to go down the aisles of Target and find every little single ingredient. They just want to buy the kit, like just have somebody else measure it all and give it to you so that you can then do the fun part. And so that would be the next evolution of that of that kind of project. And then I'm also working on my first book for adults, because I've only written children's books up until this point. I've written 9 children's books, and that's been really fun. I've done a picture book, I've done a chapter book series, and I've done a science experiment book. And so I've dabbled in basically all of the different types of children's books one can dabble in. But what stuck with me is when I would do these book signings and I would meet the kids who read my books, I would often meet like a family with a little kid, usually a little girl, who would be wearing this lab coat or an astronaut suit. And she would be so excited to tell me about her love of science. And it was so sweet and so inspiring, so cute. And she would leave. And then the mom would come up to me and like very quietly, as if it was like some secret we were sharing. And with tears in her eyes, she would be like, and thank you for all that you do for women. And I was like, I want to write a book for you so that you don't feel like you need to whisper that. Like, I want to put words to your emotions and make you feel more confident in the things that you're feeling. And so I'm working on something. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like just yet, but I've written quite a lot. And now I just need to organize it all. But adult books are a different beast. I've been working on this for a year now, and it's been hard to organize.
Yeah.
So that's the
what
next.
Do you do? Do you like have an idea and then you just sit down and start writing and hope that it eventually turns into something?
Makes sense. Yeah. Like you step back and there's a picture somewhere. I have like a number of events that have happened in my life that I feel like I have insights on and takeaways from. And so it was like when I was harassed at TSA for my breast pump equipment, and then leveraged social media to create this outcry, and was live on CNN a week later addressing the president, and then worked with my congressional representatives to write a bill to help solve that problem. And I was like, there's so much that happened in that time frame that I have some takeaways and some lessons learned and some inspirational things that happened that I want to share. And then I started a campaign to improve parental leave in the aerospace industry. And that worked. That improved parental leave across the aerospace industry. And then getting Emily's Wonder Lab picked up, and the response from that, and growing up in West Virginia and how that impacts the way that I talk about science, particularly in communities who are perhaps less willing to accept the scientific consensus on things.
Yes.
And I have a lot of ideas that are somewhat separate, but also in a way connected, because they're all about sort of like feminist manifesto, but with science stories mixed in. But yeah.
Wait, so how do you talk to communities that don't necessarily buy into science?
So with West Virginia, on the surface level, what you'll see is a state that is the #1 state in the entire nation that denies climate change the most out of any other state.
Wow.
Out of any other state. And you might think, well, West Virginia, Appalachia, it's an education problem. This is what your natural inclination is that like maybe they just don't have good education there in West Virginia. But then if you take a closer look, you'll know that West Virginia was built on coal mining. And growing up in West Virginia, the story of coal that you're told is one of a love story. It's like this Ryan Gosling rom-com of Ryan Gosling and coal in West Virginia. And it's like beloved. Like if you are not a friend of coal in West Virginia, then do you hate West Virginia? Do you hate yourself? Because this is what it means to be a West Virginian. In coal companies, they will pay teachers to teach coal lessons designed by the coal industry in their science classes. And you can kind of imagine the spin on coal in those classes. And so from a very young age, you are taught that to be a friend of coal is to be West Virginian, and to be environmentally friendly is not very friendly to West Virginia, because we're losing jobs. And West Virginia's entire economy was kind of held up on these sticks of the coal industry. And when the coal industry started to collapse, so did the economy of West Virginia, so did the livelihoods of so many West Virginians. My dad, who worked his way out of poverty, did so because he worked at the #1 coal company in the country. And he worked there for 17 years until he got laid off, but because the coal industry started going down. And that was when the panic set in of like, well, what are we going to do next? And he was one of the lucky ones who found another job, but most West Virginians are not so lucky. But essentially, when I talk about science in West Virginia, I think of the context. And I think of those people who have lost their livelihoods because the coal industry went down because of environmentally friendly policies, which is not the case. Like I'm using air quotes here because the coal industry died mostly thanks to market forces from cheaper alternatives. But
Yeah.
So when I talk about climate change, I don't reference it from well, you're just too stupid to understand the science. I reference it from I understand why you have a natural inclination to not want this to be true, because environmentally friendly policies do not seem like they are friendly to you or your livelihoods. So let's talk about it from an economic perspective and not an educational one. And so we can talk about the jobs that are being created in renewable energy. We can talk about different ways to leverage the land in West Virginia for more sustainable purposes, but also economic purposes. You can talk about how having your electricity be run on 100% coal or 99% coal makes it harder to bring jobs into the state, because many of these high-tech jobs, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters and all these companies of the world, have these sustainability standards that prevent them from coming to a state like West Virginia. So anyways, long-winded answer. This is one of those, I did a TED Talk on this, so I have like a lot of thoughts.
That's great. Absolutely.
Essentially, you talk about it from an angle that they care about, not what you think they should care about.
So you're not trying to change their mind necessarily. You're basically you're just coming at it a different way.
You're empathizing and you're showcasing the value of a different perspective. But first and foremost, you're listening to them. You're like, well, why do you have these feelings toward environmentalism? Like, tell me about that.
Right.
And that is the only way you learn that it's not because they don't agree with the science. They don't care. That's not a part of the conversation. It's about jobs, not science.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So how often do you get the opportunity to speak to people in West Virginia about this?
Well, about climate change, very not so often, but in West Virginia, I speak all the time. I go back to my home state all the time. I did speak at a climate change conference in the last year. So they do have these these tech forward climate change conferences where people will come together to try to figure out a sustainable future for West Virginia. And I like to go back and be present for those because it's such an important conversation for the state.
That's great. And do you actually find those, or is your manager helpful in finding those
people
things?
in West Virginia find me. Like, I'm very
that's great.
That I know a lot of people in West Virginia, and a lot of people in West Virginia know of my work. And so I am invited back quite often, which is like I feel very grateful that I have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And just real quick on the parental leave topic, you said that you said that a change was made. What change were you able to affect?
Yeah. So the challenge with parental leave is that for most large companies, you have no idea what parental leave you get until you ask for it. And so one of the ways that you can make parental leave more competitive is by publicizing all of the different companies' parental leave policies. And so what I did was I asked my followers to share their parental leave policies with me. And then I made a very public document showing everybody's parental leave policy, and some were much better than others. And once that data became known, I worked with a parental leave company. So it's called Parently, and it's literally a company that specializes in helping companies develop better parental leave policies. And so I worked with the experts on the topic and created a document that employees could bring to their HR representatives to advocate for better parental leave at their own companies. And the way that it worked was the document showed data on why parental leave policies are a good investment, because yes, they cost money, but you reduce employee attrition and you increase the number of years that you have an employee. And so that reduces retraining hours, that reduces rehiring hours. Like it's a smart investment long-term. But then you also show all of their competitors' parental leave policies. And you're like, do you see what Blue Origin's offering? Because we're losing a lot of people to Blue Origin, and maybe that's why. So this would be a good thing to do to make our company more competitive, and also just make your company more inclusive. Because if you're talking about, so many companies talk about wanting to hire women. Yeah. Well, if your parental leave policy sucks, then you're not really walking the walk. You're not talking the talk and you're not putting your company policies where your mouth is. And so it's one way that you can improve. And I found that most companies were happy to improve it. They were happy to find like a tangential way to actually improve their recruitment policies for women and people who want families. So it worked out really well. I was very happy all across the board of
That's amazing
how receptive it was.
But it's so true, right? I mean, I come from a tier 2 company, and our benefits are not as competitive as the tier 1 companies. And we're seeing this big gap in hiring younger generations. But it's true. People care about that. And if you don't have it, you're just out of the mix. It's just not, people are not going to come. So Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such a special episode, and we're really excited to see how your career kind of takes off from here and just continues, right? I mean, you started at MIT not thinking you were going to become a TV host, an author, and now you're here and you're just making, the space industry better for all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on the Space for All podcast. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify or iTunes, and you can watch full episodes on YouTube. We hope you will join us again for the next episode of Space for All, where we can all find a place in space.